How are you, Dr. Rhonda? So great to see you.
It's great seeing you as well. And now, did I say your name correctly? Is it
Oh,
Damali?
perfect. Yeah, that was perfect.
Yay!
Anyone with all those degrees behind them will knows how to say Damali, I'm sure. I'm sure.
That's my quiet flex.
I'm a fan. I'm a fan.
Thank you. How are you tonight?
I am excellent. I've been going nonstop and I was so looking forward to this. So thanks for having me on.
Well, I'm glad to have you here, and I'm looking forward to jumping into our interview.
Sounds good to me.
So, before we get started, I like to always ask, tell us who Peterman is.
Absolutely. Let's see, I'm a mother, I'm a friend, I'm a sister. Uh, I am a person who believes in God. And all of the above. I am a lawyer, a mediator, I'm an educator, and I'm an author. That's me.
Love it. Now, speaking of authors, I'm looking at the books behind you, and
Yeah.
they look like books that I need to get into. I see one that's called Negotiating While Black, and I
Yes.
can't read all of the other one. It says, Be Who You Are. There we go. To get what you want.
Yeah.
Yes. So this is all about negotiation as well. So
Yes.
would you categorize yourself as a business author?
I think that I sit in two categories in personal growth, which we all talk about as being self-help or personal improvement, and also a business author, 100% yes.
Awesome, awesome. So why did you feel that you wanted to talk about negotiating? Because I will say that often, especially as Black women, sometimes we hold back a little bit and we don't always advocate for ourselves. We advocate for everybody else. We advocate for our families. We advocate for our communities. But when it comes to advocating for ourselves, we're afraid. At least I'll speak for myself. Sometimes I don't like being called that self-promoter person. Or
Mhm.
I don't like being called selfish, or I'm bragging on myself. So and I've been told those things when all I was doing was just telling people I had a book.
Yes,
And then often we're told these things.
I understand exactly where you're coming from. The same thing has happened to me. And it's interesting, right? Because on the one hand, if you don't spread the word yourself, how can you expect others to, right? On
Exactly.
the other hand, these are not small accomplishments, right? These are things that take a lot of time, energy, effort, resources. And once it's done, how is that any different than any other piece of art, right? That we go see in a gallery. A book is a work of art in a bookstore or a library or wherever you may have it. And so to answer your question about why did I write this book and why, and talking specifically about women and Black women and people who may need to have that extra encouragement to negotiate, I'll say a couple of things. One, something that came up a lot was people feeling like they weren't good negotiators. And you said it. Oftentimes, especially if it's not socially or culturally acceptable, we may not want to negotiate for ourselves, but we negotiate and advocate for others. And that feels better sometimes because you aren't the beneficiary yourself, right? You're doing it for someone else and you see them and you're elevating them. And that's why we are considered to be, the superwomen, right? That's why we do run into the burning building when everyone is running out. But when
Mhm.
it comes to negotiating specifically, because women were saying, I don't negotiate, or I don't like negotiating, or I'm not good at negotiating, because people were saying, I've read a lot of books on negotiations, but I still don't feel like I've mastered it. And for me, as someone who was negotiating cross-border transactions and negotiating for my children, for my family, for friends, and advising people on how to negotiate, I realized that there was just something missing in the literature that focused on negotiations, because the way that negotiations were taught in many books and also in all the courses that I've taken globally it was really a copy me method. Do you know what I mean, Dr. Under? It's like, I was successful doing it this way. If you do it this way, you too
Right,
will be successful.
right.
And how does that work? If we're not one size fits all people, how can there be a one size fits all approach? And how do people who encounter biases on a regular basis, because check, what box do you want to check? Women, economic differences, social, we can check any box that you want.
Mhm.
Um, And because these biases exist, especially subconscious or different types of cognitive biases, a one size fits all approach doesn't work for everyone. So how do we meet people where they are? How do we empower people and help them to see that negotiating isn't just business, right? It isn't just in a formal setting, but it's what you do when you're trying to figure out screen time with your kid. It's
Yes.
what you do if someone hits you in the back of your heel in the grocery store with their shopping cart, and you have to figure out how you're going to react in that minute. It's what you do when you're advocating for a friend, for an animal, for anyone that you advocate for. It's something that we do every day. We all have our superpowers, and how can we tap into that? Right. And see that we are negotiators. We negotiate every day, and we're probably better at it than we think. We just never have the
Yes.
right guy. Right.
Yeah, and as you speak, I think of two things. One, coming from a place of fear to where if I advocate too much, maybe I won't get the job, or
Yeah.
maybe they'll change their mind about giving me that position, or
Right.
they won't see me favorably. So sometimes it comes from that place of fear. But
Yeah.
then there's that other part where we may be coming across as inauthentic because we may be using that copy me method, and we see it
Yeah.
worked for this man or it worked for this lady over here, so it's got to work for me too. So
Right.
when we do it, we don't seem as authentic because we're not coming from who we are. We're trying to do it the way so and so did it.
Yes, exactly. And that's the rub, right? Because there is something that feels disingenuous, something that's just slightly not right. And even if we all look the same, right, and try to use the same method, it wouldn't work because we all have different superpowers and snacks. And so it's exactly that bit of what feels inauthentic, trying to do something that worked for someone else. Just right now, it's Olympic season, right? You see different people compete in the same sports, the same
Yes.
categories, and they all do it different ways. And they're all the top in their country. They're all the best athletes. But you can literally watch. I was watching synchronized swimming yesterday, and it's amazing. Like watching every country come there and compete, and it's completely different, right? And they all have the same rules, the same guidelines, and you
Mhm.
can sort of see if you apply that to just negotiations. When we're talking about fear, you're absolutely right. Oftentimes, it's the fear of coming across the wrong way, the fear of asking for too much and maybe seeming like you're not happy with what's being offered to you, that prevent people from negotiating for more, right? That prevent people from saying, you know what, this is my shot. Why don't I just take it, right? I think that what I fear more than that is not asking the question. Sometimes we may realize in that interview process that it's not the right place for us. It's not the right job, right? Maybe this isn't the right fit. It's not the right fit for a variety of reasons. And one question you have to ask yourself is, do I feel comfortable being me? If my nature is one to be inquisitive and to ask questions, especially before that job offer, like before you get the job, that's when you have the most leverage. They're interviewing you because they're trying to fill a position and they think you have some of the prerequisite, if not all, skills. And then you're interviewing them too to see if they're the right fit and the right place for your skills. So oftentimes I feel like people see that they believe they're at a disadvantage when they're trying to enter into a new opportunity, a new job, or they're trying to have a lateral transfer or promotion without thinking about the fact that, there's a lot that you bring to the table. That push the fear aside, ask the question. That's when you have the most power, and knowledge is power. So you can learn a lot from the way they answer the questions.
There you go. Now, what are some of the tips that you share with women? I believe what Be Who You Are is the first book. I mean, excuse me, the latest book, correct?
Well, actually, they're predominantly the same book. It's just that
Okay.
in the U.S. And North American rights were sold to Penguin Random House, and so the cover in North America is the one, negotiating while black, the one that's here, and then the cover that's supposed to be distributed in several countries, about 72 or so, is this title because it doesn't translate the same way, right? So we know how that works, and it's also a different publisher in the UK. And so it's 99% the exact same book, which is a very interesting social experiment, right? To see what title people gravitate towards and why.
Have you gotten any evidence yet as to which one people are
Yes.
referring?
I have. So I've been seeing that a lot of people, because with Negotiating While Black, that's my original title. Oftentimes, as you know, as an author, we are oftentimes asked to change our titles, right? So the book is
Yes.
purchased, and then there is some nice give and take where you can say, hey, I want to change the title, or the editor says they want to change the title. This title was very important to me. I wanted a lot of things to happen with this cover. One, I wanted to share our stories. I feel like there's so many books that make it clear that they're not intended for us and oftentimes very vague in their titles. And I wanted it to be clear that I'm talking about Negotiating While Black. I wanted people to look at it and say, oh, I know I'm going to learn some stories or hear some stories, at least in part, about the Black experience. Two, I wanted it to be not just Negotiating While Black. I wanted it to be provocative so that people could also see themselves in that category of Black. So what I mean by that is sometimes I say in my mind, it's negotiating by while blank, whatever box you check. So whether it's young, whether it's a woman, male, whether it's any other LGBTQIA plus family, whatever box you check, and recognizing that there's intersectionality. There's also some irony embedded into it too, because thinking about it, while Black, that's only one way that people show up in the world, right?
Yes.
There are many things, many boxes I check,
Yeah.
right?
You're not a
So
monolith.
exactly. And it's not a monolith. I say that probably on the third page in the book, that it's not a monolith. And so I just wanted to do different things. The subtitle, which is highlighted as the title in my international book, is Be Who You Are to Get What You Want. I
Mhm.
wanted people to see that part of it too, to identify, to see if they identified with that. I want to be who I am and get what I want. I don't want to follow someone else's script. I'm
Yes.
not giving people scripts in this book. At the end of each chapter, there's a toolkit. So the same way you would go to your toolkit and you're not going to use a sledgehammer to hang a painting on the wall, you're going to figure out which tool is appropriate, right? That's how this book is set up. So you go through it, you figure out at the end of the chapter which tool is for you, and you utilize it based on your own judgment and what your individual needs are. And that's what I wanted this to do. And then finally, the subtitle is a new way to negotiate for anyone who's been underestimated. How many times have we been underestimated, right?
Yes.
You see that happening on a global stage right now,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Underestimate. You can have the resume, you can have all the skills, you can check all the boxes and still be misunderstood and
Mhm.
still be underestimated. And so my book, even though on its face, to answer your question, how's doing, it feels like it's intended only for Black people. And I want to say, of course, I wrote a book for all readers. Of course, it's not just for Black people. It's for anyone who's been underestimated, misunderstood, anyone who wants to improve their negotiation skills, and anyone who wants to be who they are and get what they want. And the international book is also doing very well because there's no mention of race or anything like that. So
And,
it's very
it's interesting
interesting.
that you say that because my next question was going to be when we talk about Black women have different experiences in different
Yes,
countries. An
yes,
African Black woman may experience things a little bit more differently than, let's say, a Dutch Black woman,
that's
uh,
right.
and versus a Belgian Black woman versus a French Black woman versus an American Black woman. So,
Yes.
because you have one book that's kind of going to the other countries, I'm just wondering, are you getting different reactions based on the locations of the readers?
So far, no. And I will say that I've been to over 50 countries and I've been to, I think, all the countries that you named and several countries in Africa. And I've interacted with Black women and Black people and people of color in many countries in different settings. And what I will say is that I know for a fact in Kenya it's doing very well because I've spent some time in Kenya recently. And I also led a summit virtually in Kenya and I continue to do work in Kenya. It's doing very well there. I know it's doing very, very well. And by the way, this book is doing well across different demographics, which is great because the way I feel about this title is that if you aren't Black, why wouldn't you read it? I mean, if you're an ally and you say you're an ally, why wouldn't you read it? If you aren't a woman, why wouldn't you read a book that says, so just basically kind of tapping into people's wokeness, if you will.
Yeah.
It's easy to put a black square, on a social media platform to show solidarity. It's easy to say things like hashtag Black Lives Matter. It's easy to share stories about good things that are happening and also things that shock our sensibilities, especially when we hear about, continued police brutality, among other things. But what's interesting is to see in public who holds this book. And it's doing what I wanted it to do. In terms of Black women being different, what I love about this book is I've gotten a lot of love for Black women, a lot of love for people who feel seen and heard by this book, a lot of love from mothers who tell me across the board, regardless of race and ethnicity, that it's helped them advocate for their children. A lot of men who say, you know what, I've taken a lot of classes and this breaks it down. It's easy to digest and I get it. And so I feel like, for me, I just want to read a good book, don't you? Like you want to read a good book. And if people are telling you it's a good book, then shoot, it's a good book.
It's a good time for this book right now, especially with a Black woman running for president.
Yes, yes. And maybe you've seen this too, but my social media has been flooded with different memes saying, we're going to have to take care of ourselves because we're going to be dragged over the next 100 years. We're going to be 100 days. We're going to be tested, in terms of people going after us. I've seen across Instagram and other platforms, the DEI candidate. And
Yeah.
I'm not trying to make this a political conversation, but what I'll say about that particular perspective is that's exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the bias that is either explicit and we see it, DEI candidate, or the cognitive bias, that biases that people have that they may not be aware of that manifest, and we're just kind of like, whoa, did that just happen? Was it just me who saw that? Or did no one else understand that that was a bias that was presented? And then how do you navigate that? How do you manage a bias that someone may not be aware of, and you still get what you need out of that interaction, that negotiation? Because think about the times that let's use the word triggered, right? Maybe something comes across condescending, or there's some ask of us that we think isn't appropriate, let's use that word, and we have to figure out how to navigate it. What tools do we have to utilize so that at the end of the day, we're still maximizing what we need, getting what we need and what we want? And you asked me this question, you asked me for some of the tools. And I'll say that one tool that I call the foundational five is key because it's something that you can go back to. It's
Okay.
5 things. And there are 5 things that you need to know. Know what you want, know what you need, know how to actively listen, know how to communicate, and know when to close, right?
Mm,
And put listening before communicating, because often when we are preparing to enter a discussion, we are thinking about our talking points, right? We're
right.
planning on what we're going to say, but we're not always planning to listen.
That's true. And then often we, even when the interviewer is still talking or coming up with their next question, we're not really always listening. We're thinking about what we're going to say to respond.
Yeah, and people don't, I mean, that's 100% true. People don't listen for a variety of reasons. They're thinking about what they want to say to respond. Maybe they aren't listening because they don't like what's being said. And if we're being honest, perhaps we don't like the person who's talking, right? And so there's that bias within ourselves. We're like, I don't care what this person has to say.
Yeah.
I'm not listening to them. I don't like this person. I don't agree with their perspective. And so you just sort of shut down. But what I found in my experience is that oftentimes we learn more about what the other person needs and wants and what's important to them, and where we get to figure out their any shared interests by listening to what they've prioritized telling us.
Absolutely. Now, do you teach workshops to go along with your books?
I do. I do. I've been teaching for years. In fact, I had a fun conversation today. My first negotiation course was even before I went to law school, after I went to grad school to get my master's degree. And it was abroad. It was actually in Austria, the Czech Republic, and Hungary. And then went to New York and DC. And I teach negotiation workshops. And part of the reason I wrote this book, to get back to your earlier question, was because people would ask me, what other resources can you recommend? And I found myself, for lack of a better word, sort of Frankensteining, like putting together different things, right? So I would say, you can read a little bit of this, a page of that, but for the most part, I was writing it. I was writing sort of, this is what you should do based on I would ask questions. What are your needs, right? But because to me, negotiation is really not a science. I think it's more of an art, or I would say perhaps it's art and science, but it's more of an art, right?
I would say it's an art as well. So we did put your website in the chat. It is damalipeterman.com, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so is that where people can go to find out more information about your books and your workshops and so forth?
Yes, they can definitely go there. DamaliPeterman.com has everything, and it sends you to Breakthrough ADR, which is my other company, where we have workshops. And then, of course, follow me. That's very important. I realize I never talking about asking for what you want. I never tell people, follow me. We're going to have, more information, and also giving out, free information and different tips and techniques on our Instagram. So
We did put your Instagram in the chat as well. Mary Evans, who's watching, she's been helping me out since Gwen wasn't able to stay on tonight. So, Mary, thank you so much for your help. She's put your website in as well as your Instagram and your Facebook.
thank you so much. We love all of the platforms. I'm trying to get better at doing TikToks, but I'm not there yet. I
I
haven't
keep,
figured out my
you know,
next move.
don't even feel bad because I have a TikTok and I was doing really well with it. And then I just keep forgetting to put I made two videos in the past 2 days and I only put them on Facebook. I keep forgetting that I have a TikTok account. So I have to get better at that. So
We
don't
all do. We all do. Can I ask you a question? I know you're interviewing
feel
me, but I mean, can you talk about like your experience in negotiations and something that you found that you're really good at, and then something that you want to improve?
Well, it's funny that you ask about me. So my doctorate is in organizational leadership. And my dissertation was on the myth of the angry Black woman. And so some of
Wow.
the things that I was asking you about really came from my dissertation about often Black women who are in leadership positions, especially when we get to higher level leadership positions. Sometimes we'll either lean into the stereotype because we think that's what they expect from us and that's how we're going to get what we want, or we lean so far from the stereotype that we don't come across as authentic because we're trying to be agreeable. And so
Mm,
I'm retired Army, and my last couple years in the Army, I was dealing with, I was the only Black female station manager for American Forces Network. If I disagreed with something, I was called argumentative. Even if I wasn't arguing, even if I didn't raise my voice, I didn't go along with the group, so I was automatically considered argumentative. So
mm,
one thing for me that I've always tried to do was, how can I voice my opinion and explain why I differ from the group thing without it sounding like I'm angry or upset or being combative. So that's
mm.
always kind of been my teeter-totter, so to speak.
Ooh, and I love, first of all, thank you for your service. I think that's amazing. And two, I love hearing about your dissertation, especially this myth of the angry Black woman. And what you'll find in my book is that I talk about how sometimes people, well, one, perception. Sometimes you cannot control someone else's perception of you, right? Because their perception is informed by different things, including their exposure, experience, education, etc. So you could be talking just like this, and then they're like, "Oh, you're yelling." I'm like, "Wait, who's yelling? I'm not yelling," but that's how they're perceiving the interaction. Because you can't, no one can control how someone receives the message, receives and hears it. But I like what you're saying about, kind of like this it's kind of a paradox of two competing truths, right? And how people navigate the stereotype, and then what the stereotype threat is, which is, making sure that you teeter like really far away from, that stereotype, because it's a threat to you if that's not really where you land. And
Right.
so I think it's interesting to hear about your dissertation, and I think it's especially important now, given the political climate, as we're seeing, a Black woman in the US being elevated to the highest office in the US.
Absolutely. And I remember Michelle Obama went through it as well. I mean, people were writing books about how mean she was, and she was a lawyer. You know, she's a very straightforward person. And if you read her book Becoming, you'll notice she was always very straightforward. She said what
Yes.
was on her mind. And often that's considered combative to somebody who is not used to Black women speaking up for themselves or advocating for themselves.
It's so true. And I love that you mentioned Becoming. Excellent book. She is a lawyer. Kamala's a lawyer. I'm a lawyer. You have a doctorate. I feel like there's a theme of women who, I think who, there are a lot of women who speak up for themselves, who have this education that kind of pushes you towards being a good representative of yourself, but also vocal in a sense. And I think something that's interesting is who are the naysayers, right? Who are the people who have these strong opinions? Who are the people who are putting you in a category of aggressive where others are considered assertive or
Yes.
and sometimes ambitious can even be like
Matter.
that word, right? And then deciding, look around you and see who your community of wonderful women and people are, and being grateful for people like you who are doing amazing work, serving your country, getting your doctorate, writing books. I mean, that to me is like chef's kiss, perfect and amazing. And that's exactly what we need because Black authors do matter. But not only that, I think it's important to recognize that people communicate in different ways. And everyone isn't going to communicate the same way. And for people to sort of resist the judgment element of saying, and putting someone in a category based on a short period of time, because that happens too. Have you noticed that that happens too frequently where people are sort of put into a box and they're kind of left in that box? And
Yes.
hopefully what our stories are doing are hopefully encouraging people to be themselves, to be their best selves, right? And to feel comfortable doing that on a regular basis, but also not letting being authentic be a substitute for being thoughtful.
Amen. I mean, I think that's a great way, unfortunately, to end this interview because we've already hit that 30-minute mark. But this was a great conversation. So I thank you for writing these books and bringing all of these different layers to light because it's something sometimes we don't think about until we're in the thick of it.
It's
So
so
I'm glad that you wrote these books. I'm looking forward to reading them myself. I mean, because I'm still working federal government. I have a federal government job now. And fortunately, I work with some pretty great people. So I don't feel like I'm combating as much as I used to, but you never know when it pops up. So it's always good to have these tools in your toolkit.
absolutely. And thank you so much for your time, your interview. I would take a snapshot of us.
Okay.
I think I'm trying to do that. I think I did it. And I appreciate your time.
And we will be sending you a recording as well that you'll be able to use later. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And
All
I
right.
hope you
Thank
enjoy
you.
the interviews.
All right. You take care. Have a great night.
Bye, Dr. Rhonda.
Bye bye.
Bye.